The recruitment process is a time of great opportunity for your organization and team members. At the same time, employment and hiring decisions are high stakes for both the employer and potential candidates. A number of legal protections have been established to ensure that the process is non-discriminatory. A truly open and competitive recruitment process is not only legally correct, but works to meet organizational goals for a diverse and motivated workforce. This presentation will provide an overview of the policies and practices used by the state of Vermont to achieve a fair and legal process. The first test that you should apply to all aspects of your recruitment is job relatedness. We all know that intentional discrimination is wrong and prohibited by law, but we may unintentionally discriminate if we are not careful to establish criteria that are clearly and objectively based on the actual work to be performed. Job-related means simply that your requirements and decisions are clearly linked to the job being filled and the business needs of the organization. Your criteria must be ones that are objectively and factually based on the requirements of the position. A valid business necessity is present when the stated requirement has a direct bearing on the performance of the job. Any selection criteria that has the effect of excluding individuals who are covered by laws prohibiting discrimination must be unavoidable because of specific job requirements. The state of Vermont has an equal employment opportunity policy, which includes a commitment not to discriminate in our employment practices, including recruitment and hiring. Stated in terms of compliance with the law, we do not discriminate on the basis of a protected category, including race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, place of birth, age, or disability. Stated in positive terms, beyond avoiding discrimination, we promote best practices that support an objective and inclusive recruitment and hiring process. Being inclusive is a good way to think about striving not just to avoid discrimination, but to actually promote fairness and diversity through our recruitment and hiring processes. There are many dimensions to a diverse workplace and many ways in which a diverse workforce benefits an organization. In the state of Vermont, we have 3 specific protocols that hiring managers must follow to ensure that all candidates have an opportunity to compete for our jobs. These are veterans preference, mandatory interview, and reasonable accommodation. Veterans preference is provided under state law, and there are 2 ways that we support qualified veterans to compete for state jobs. The first strategy is to give veterans extra points on their state of Vermont application. Each job opening produces a ranked candidate list. All qualified candidates receive a minimum of 50 points. Up to 50 additional points may be assigned based on preferred qualifications. Those who are eligible for veterans preference receive an additional 5 to 10 points. When prioritizing candidates for interview, consideration should be given to total points assigned to each candidate. Veterans preference does not establish the right to a mandatory interview, but we do encourage hiring managers to consider veteran status when determining who to interview. The second strategy is to open state promotional job postings to veterans. Job postings may be open to all candidates, open only to internal candidates of the department or agency, or state promotional. If a job posting is state promotional, only veterans and state employees who have completed original probation are eligible to apply. Applicants with a qualifying disability may request mandatory interview status. Once the applicant is granted mandatory interview status, that will be noted on the candidate list when the applicant is routed to the hiring manager. If an applicant with this status is referred to you, he or she must be offered an interview. This does not guarantee the applicant the position, merely the opportunity of an interview. The question of reasonable accommodation may surface either during the interview process itself or in discussing the requirements of the position. An applicant who needs accommodation in the job interview process will generally communicate that need directly to the hiring manager at the time the interview is scheduled. Interviewers should be as flexible as possible in providing accommodation. If a request is unreasonable or burdensome to accommodate, it is advisable to discuss it with your HR representative before responding to the applicant. With respect to the requirements of the position, the best practice is to provide all candidates with a description of the essential functions of the position and ask them if they can perform those functions with or without reasonable accommodation. If a candidate indicates that some accommodation will be required, you can discuss the specifics once you've made a conditional offer of employment to the candidate. Using a structured interview process is a best practice to ensure that your hiring decision is both fair and sound. Structured interviews also have the advantage of creating a better impression with applicants than more subjective approaches. The elements of a structured interview are covered in detail in the Guide to Interviewing and Reference Checking, which is posted on the DHR website. The three basic parts of a structured interview are having questions prepared in advance, using an interview panel, and knowing how you are going to evaluate the candidates. The questions must be job related, and all applicants are asked the same questions. Of course, a good interview is a conversation, and it is appropriate to ask follow-up and clarifying questions to fully assess each candidate's unique responses. An interview panel is most effective when diverse viewpoints are represented in the group and the members have training in how to conduct an effective interview and selection process. Interview panels are typically 3 to 5 people, depending on the level of the position being filled. Define your evaluation criteria before you enter into your interview process. This includes knowing how the interview questions connect to your job requirements and having a tool for assessing candidates' responses. Documentation is an essential part of all human resources activities, including recruitment and hiring. Documentation is used for data and tracking, as well as for research in the event that complaints or other issues arise. Good records also save time in the future when you want to reuse a job description or interview questions. There are two aspects of documentation that hiring managers need to pay attention to. The first is record keeping, and the second is ensuring that required documents are obtained prior to finalizing an offer of employment. VTHR is designed to be the system of record for applicant data. The hiring manager's role in maintaining that data is to update applicant status to know all candidates who were selected for interview. The hiring manager is also responsible to update the status of routed applicants once the decision has been made not to pursue the candidate further. The recruitment checklist for hiring managers posted on the Human Resources website specifies the actions to be taken. Your HR representative or the recruitment office can answer any questions and provide training as needed. A number of paper records are also generated during the recruitment and selection process. The hiring manager is expected to retain all of these documents for at least 3 years. This includes all interview notes and the tools used to prioritize and select candidates. For that reason, it is important that all notes are professional in tone, job-related, and free of personal comments. There are several inquiries that must be made prior to finalizing an offer to a candidate. In general, the tax compliance check is required for all new hires, but does not apply to active state employees. Any offer of employment is conditional pending a review of the applicant's standing with the tax department. The criminal history declaration form must be obtained prior to any job offer. Applicants may be asked to complete the form after the review of the application and first interview. Background check requirements vary by position and department. Please check with your HR representative to determine what pre-employment checks are required in your department. To recap, you can ensure that your hiring practices are legal and consistent with state policy by following a few simple guidelines. First, make sure that your requirements, selection criteria, and interview questions are all job-related. Second, be inclusive. Be aware of candidates who qualify for veterans preference or mandatory interview. Be flexible in providing reasonable accommodation when requested. Provide candidates with the essential functions of the position and ask if they can perform those functions with or without reasonable accommodation. Third, Follow a structured interview process with prepared questions, an interview panel, and clearly defined selection criteria. And last, keep good records and make sure that you have conducted all applicable pre-employment record checks.